What if one small act of kindness changed not just one life, but hundreds? What if a tired, lonely mechanic in a forgotten town fixed more than just a broken wheelchair, and ended up unlocking something far bigger than he ever imagined? In today's story, you'll meet a man who lost everything, a girl who believed in more, and a quiet garage where hope found its way back in, one wheel at a time. If stories of healing, human connection, and the power of simple goodness speak to your heart, you're in the right place. Be sure to subscribe and turn on the bell so you never miss another story that might just restore your faith in people. Now, settle in. This is a story you won't forget. Poor mechanic fixed a disabled girl's wheelchair for free. Days later, a helicopter landed outside. Ray Turner had never been a man of many words, but the silence that filled his garage each evening was starting to feel less like peace and more like weight, the kind of weight you carry in your chest. Not heavy enough to break you, but just enough to make everything feel a little slower, a little colder. The sun was dipping low, behind the hayfields of rural Wyoming, casting long golden fingers of light through the smeared windows of Turner's Auto Repair. The garage sat alone, off a dusty road, flanked by a rusted gas pump no longer in use, and an American flag that hadn't flown right in years. The wind had taken its edge, like it had done to everything else around here. Inside, Ray leaned over the open hood of a 1992 Chevy S10, his calloused hands moving with the kind of certainty that only came from decades of repetition. His flannel shirt was stained at the cuffs, and the grey in his beard had long overtaken the black. He didn't mind the solitude. He didn't need much these days. A warm cup of coffee in the morning, the crackle of his old radio, and enough. Work to keep his hands busy, and his mind from drifting too far into places it shouldn't go. There was a picture on the wall above his workbench. It was faded now, curling at the edges. A younger Ray stood with his arm around a boy, 10, maybe 11, wearing a baseball cap 2 sizes too big. The boy grinned up at the camera like he had the whole world ahead of him. Ray hadn't touched the frame in over a year. The boy's name was Caleb, Ray's only son. The accident had been sudden, like most are. A drunk driver on black ice. His wife, Sarah, died on impact. Caleb had survived the crash, but never quite made it back to the boy in the photo. 3 long years of surgeries, wheelchairs, seizures, until his body simply gave up. Ray buried them both in the same cemetery, 2 rows apart. He hadn't celebrated a holiday since. The old bell above the garage door jingled faintly in the wind. No customer, just the breeze again. Ray straightened, rubbing the ache out of his lower back. Business had slowed to a crawl in recent years. People either couldn't afford car repairs or had moved to towns where bigger garages offered faster service. But the few folks who still brought their aging trucks and dusty tractors to Ray Turner knew one thing. He wouldn't cheat them. He'd charge what he thought was fair, and sometimes not at all. That's what had kept him afloat, barely. A barter here, a home-cooked pie there. He wasn't in it for the money anymore. Hadn't been for years. He wiped his hands on a shop rag and stepped outside. The wind was picking up, sharp and dry. Across the fields, clouds gathered like heavy thoughts. There'd be rain by nightfall, maybe snow if it dipped cold enough. Wyoming always turned early. As Ray stood there, sipping cold coffee from a chipped mug, his eyes caught movement in the distance, something small, rolling unsteadily along the gravel road, a wheelchair. At first he thought it was abandoned. Then he saw the child struggling to turn one of the wheels, her arms trembling with the effort. A woman, mid-40s maybe, followed. Close behind, clearly distressed but trying not to show it. Ray set down the mug. By the time he reached them, the girl had stopped, breathing hard. One of the rear wheels had collapsed inward at a strange angle. It wasn't going anywhere. "Need a hand?" Ray asked, crouching beside the chair. The girl looked up. She had deep brown eyes, wide and alert, but tired, like she'd learned. Too young that the world didn't always wait for her to catch up. Wheel broke, she said simply. Again. Looks that way. The woman stepped forward, a gentle hand on the girl's shoulder. We were just passing through. I think we hit a rock or something. I don't suppose. You could help? Ray looked at the wheel, then at the girl, then back at the quiet garage behind him. Bring her in, he said. The wheelchair was a mess. Bent axles, stripped bolts, one brake completely useless. Ray rolled it up the ramp into the garage, while the woman, who introduced herself as Marie, helped the girl onto a stool by the workbench. Her name was Lila, 9 years old, chatty, once she warmed up. Do you always fix things? She asked. Watching him work. Sometimes, Ray muttered. Do you fix people too? Ray glanced up, a half smile tugging at his lips. Not sure I ever managed that one. Lila giggled. You kinda smell like the inside of a tractor, but you're nice. Marie let out a tired but grateful laugh. Lila? She chided gently. No, she's right, Ray said, chuckling. I've been around old engines so long I probably leak motor oil. The repairs took longer than expected, but Ray didn't rush. He replaced the bent parts with spares from a dusty drawer in the back. Not perfect matches, but better than what they had. He sanded down the corroded fittings and adjusted the seat height to make it more comfortable. When he was done, he tested the wheels himself, circling the garage with an awkward grace. Try it, he said, rolling the chair to Lila. She hopped, in or as close to hopping as her fragile frame allowed, and wheeled herself forward. The chair glided smoothly across the concrete. Her eyes lit up like someone had switched the world back on. Whoa, she whispered. It's better than before. No charge, Ray said as Marie reached for her purse. But you... No. Charge, he repeated, firmer this time. Just happy to help. Lila wheeled back to him and wrapped her arms around his waist before he could react. She didn't say thank you. She said something better. You're like a superhero, just with a wrench and a weird shirt. Ray froze, then laughed, really laughed, for the first time in months. That night, as the storm rolled in and thunder echoed faintly in the distance, Ray sat on his porch with an old photo album on his lap. He didn't open it, not yet, but he held it like a promise, like maybe something had shifted. The wheelchair was gone, but the warmth Lila left behind lingered. He didn't expect anything more. He never did. But life, like engines, had a funny way of turning over. Just when you thought it was out of gas. The rain had started falling in earnest by the following afternoon. It wasn't the kind of storm that made the headlines. No thunder, no flash floods. Just a steady curtain of drizzle, soft but relentless, like a thought that wouldn't leave. You alone. It slicked the highway and turned the dirt road that led to Turner's Auto Repair into thick, sucking mud. Most folks stayed indoors when Wyoming turned like this. The gray skies seemed to flatten everything. Colors, time, memory. Ray was in the middle of patching a radiator for Old Man Hugh's tractor when he heard it again, that faint metallic jingle of the garage's front bell. The door hadn't opened, it was just the wind. Or so he thought. Then he heard it, a soft voice, almost drowned by the rain. A child's voice. Hello? He turned toward the wide doorway and stepped outside, instinctively wiping his hands on his jeans. The drizzle pricked his skin, cold and fine. The sound came again, this time from the gravel road beyond the mailbox. Hello? Can someone help? Squinting through the grey light, he saw her, Lila. She was angled awkwardly to the side, the back. Wheel of her chair turned outward like a bird with a broken wing. Her arms strained against the rims, slick with rain, trying to steer. Behind her came a woman, bundled in a navy raincoat, panting as she rushed to catch up. Ray didn't hesitate. He jogged down the drive, boots squelching in the mud, and knelt beside the wheelchair. Up close, he could see just how badly the chair had failed. One of the rear wheel bearings had collapsed entirely, and the right footrest was hanging by a single bolt. Looks like you hit more than a puddle, he said gently, shielding Lila with his body as the rain began to pelt harder. "I didn't mean to bother," the woman said, breathless. "We're just passing through. Thought we'd make it to the next town, but the chair gave out." "You made it to the right place," Ray said without looking up. "Come on, let's get her out of the rain." Back inside the garage, the space smelled of warm oil, damp denim, and old wood. The storm clattered gently on the metal roof, like distant applause. Ray rolled Lila's chair up the ramp, careful not to jostle the bent frame too much. He pulled an old towel from the shelf and handed it to Marie, who dabbed the girl's wet forehead. "Thank you," she whispered. "I'm Marie, by the way." Ray gave a small nod, already crouched beside the chair. "Ray, let's see what we're dealing with." Lila looked around with curious eyes. "Is this where you live?" "Pretty much," he said, reaching for a wrench. "Not much to see, but it gets the job done." "I like it," she said. "It smells like something." "Important's always happening." Ray paused. It had been a long time since anyone said they liked this place. Over the next hour, the garage filled with the soft rhythm of tools and the hum of the old propane heater. Ray took the chair apart with care, laying each piece on a clean towel. He noticed something as he worked. Whoever had assembled the chair had done a hasty job. The bolts were mismatched, some even stripped. It wasn't a cheap model, but it had been handled cheaply. Marie sat nearby, sipping coffee Ray had offered from his thermos. She watched him with quiet appreciation, but didn't interfere. "You work on wheelchairs often?" she asked. Ray shrugged. "Not professionally, but a wheel's a wheel. You just have to understand what it wants." Lila giggled from her stool. "Wheels don't want anything." Ray looked over the top of his glasses. "That's where you're wrong. Everything wants something. Engines want to run, rust wants to eat, and wheels want to roll free." Lila blinked at him, then grinned. "You're weird." Ray chuckled. "You're not the first to say that." As he repaired the chair, Ray listened. Lila filled the room with words, about the clouds she saw on the drive, about her dream to someday fly a plane, about a book she was reading with a girl who built a rocket ship from soup cans. "People think just because I can't walk, I shouldn't want to do big things," she said at one point. "But I want to go up there." She pointed at the ceiling. "Above the clouds." Ray paused with a wrench in hand. "My son used to say the same thing," he said quietly. "Said if he could fly, he'd never come back down." Marie's eyes met his, surprised by the sudden openness. "You had a son?" Ray nodded, eyes fixed on the chair. "Long time ago." No one pressed him. That was the thing about good people. They knew when not to ask. Finally, he tightened the last bolt, gave the wheels a spin, and stood up. "All right, co-pilot," he said to Lila. "Ready for a test flight?" She eased herself into the chair. Ray gave it a gentle push, and it glided forward effortlessly. "Whoa!" she whispered, then spun herself in a full circle. "It's better than new." Ray raised an eyebrow. "She's sturdy now, just don't take her off any ramps." Lila beamed. "You're like a superhero." He raised his brows. "Superhero?" "Yeah, only you smell like motor oil. And you don't wear a cape." Marie laughed. "Lila!" But Ray grinned. "I'll take it." As they prepared to leave, Marie reached into her purse. "Please, at least let us pay you something. You saved us a world of trouble." Ray held up a hand. "No charge. Consider it a trade for the best conversation I've had in years." Marie hesitated, then nodded, her expression touched. Lila wheeled up to Ray, hugged him around the waist, and whispered, "I hope you fix more than cars. I think you fix people too." Ray didn't know what to say, so he didn't say anything. He just watched them roll down the ramp, disappearing into the soft mist, leaving behind the scent of rain and the echo of something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. For the rest of that afternoon, the rain drummed steadily against the roof of the garage, like a lullaby. Ray Turner stood at his workbench, staring at nothing in particular. The wheelchair was gone. The girl, too. Just a wet set of tire marks on the concrete floor, curving toward the door and disappearing into the mist. But something had stayed. Ray couldn't name it. It wasn't joy exactly, wasn't quite peace either, but it was warmer than the silence that usually wrapped around him, like a threadbare coat, lighter somehow. The girl had left a smile behind, and it wasn't hers, it was his. He tried to work. The Chevy from the day before still sat up on the lift, its rusted undercarriage waiting like it had all the time in the world. But Ray couldn't concentrate. He kept hearing her voice, bright, curious, too wise for 9, and that ridiculous declaration, "You're like a superhero, just with a wrench and a weird shirt." He chuckled under his breath. It had been so long since a child had spoken to him like that, without pity, without awkwardness. Caleb had spoken that way once, when he still had breath enough to dream and bones that hadn't yet betrayed him. Ray opened a drawer and pulled out a small box. Inside was a tarnished silver keychain, shaped like a toy plane. Caleb's. He'd saved it after the funeral, though he hadn't touched it in years. The edges were worn smooth, and the blue enamel had chipped away. He turned it over in his palm. "If I could fly, Dad," Caleb had once said, "I'd go all the way to the moon and come back just to tell you it's real." That was before the seizures, before the endless nights in sterile hospital rooms, pretending not to cry while machines beeped like tiny clocks counting down. Ray put the keychain back and shut the drawer. Later that evening, as twilight bled across the horizon, Ray lit a fire in the old stove that had come with the garage. It crackled and hissed, filling the small space with the scent of pinewood and the creak of memory. He sat on a folding chair, a mug of instant coffee cooling between his hands. He wasn't a man prone to sentiment. He didn't keep journals or write letters he'd never send. But the day had pulled something loose inside him. He found himself staring at the photo on the wall again. Caleb, in his oversized cap, missing a front tooth, one arm thrown around his father's shoulder like he'd been born to belong there. The picture was faded now, water-damaged in the lower corner. He hadn't bothered replacing it. Somehow, the imperfections made it feel more honest. Ray reached out and touched the frame. Just a brief, passing gesture, as if to say, "I still see you." The storm cleared sometime after midnight. By morning, the clouds had scattered like ash on the wind, and the Wyoming sky returned to its usual wide, indifferent blue. Ray opened the garage as he always did. Same creaking roll-up door, same groan of the old stool under his weight as he sat with his coffee. But something was different. He kept glancing down the road, half expecting to see that battered wheelchair rattling over the gravel again. It didn't come, of course. Just birdsong and the occasional passing truck. Still, the image of her stayed. With him, a skinny girl with uneven braids and big eyes, talking about flying like it was the most natural thing in the world. Most kids talked about wanting things. Lila talked like she'd already seen them. By noon, the garage had grown hot. Ray peeled off his flannel and wiped his brow with a rag. A local farmer had dropped off a busted riding mower, and he was elbow-deep in its corroded engine when the thought hit him. He'd never asked where they were going. Marie had said they were just passing through, but that could mean anywhere. Why were they on this back road to begin with? Why not on the highway? Why a second-rate patched-together wheelchair for a girl like that? It didn't sit right, not in a troubling way, just in a way that made his gut itch, but Ray wasn't one. To pry, people had their reasons. Some you could see, some you never would. That night he made a sandwich and turned on the radio. The same old station with the same old voices. A preacher from Cheyenne, a weather update from Casper, a Johnny Cash song that bled from the static like an old wound. Ray tapped his foot. He felt strange, restless. It had been years since he'd missed someone he'd only met once. He grabbed his notebook, the one he used to track customer orders, and on a blank page, he scribbled something he couldn't say out loud. "The girl reminded me of Caleb." He stared at it a long time. Then, he added, "Not in the way she looked, in the way she dreamed." The next morning began like any other. Coffee, radio, the slow creak of sunlight across the garage floor, until the bell above the door rang again. Ray looked up, but there was no one standing there. Then came the low, unmistakable thump, thump, thump of rotors slicing the sky. It grew louder, closer. He stepped outside, and that's when he saw it, hovering just beyond the tree line, lowering slowly onto the dirt field beside his garage, a helicopter. Sleek, silver, glinting like something from a dream. Ray didn't move. He just stood there, heart pounding in the cage of his ribs, the sun burning hot against his arms. The girl was gone. But the story, it seemed, had just begun. Ray Turner had never seen a helicopter land in his field. Certainly not a silver one, with tinted windows and sleek rotors slicing the air like blades from the future. He stood there, half in shadow under the frame of the garage, a wrench still. In his hand, eyes fixed on the impossible sight descending just past the gravel drive. The ground trembled faintly. The wheatgrass swayed like it was bowing. Dust kicked up in spirals. The noise, sharp, rhythmic, alien, filled his ears and chest, and somewhere deeper he hadn't felt in years. Ray squinted through the rush of wind, shielding his face with his hand. What in the hell was happening? The helicopter touched down with practiced ease, its skids settling onto the flattened grass. A moment later the side door opened. From inside emerged a man in a slate-grey suit. Sharp lines, polished shoes. That didn't belong anywhere near this kind of dirt, and behind him, a flash of bright purple, Lila same eyes, same crooked smile, different wheelchair, sleek, chrome-framed, motor-assisted, almost silent as it glided down the makeshift ramp. Ray's jaw loosened, but no words came. He took a few steps forward, not because he meant to, but because something inside him pulled. The suited man extended a hand, as if this were any ordinary Tuesday meeting. "Mr. Turner," Ray looked from the man to the girl, then slowly took the offered hand. "Yeah," he said. "That's me. I'm Charles Whitmore," the man said. "Lila's father." Ray's eyes darted back to the girl. She was grinning, wide now, like this was the best part of her day. "She's been telling me about you ever since we picked her up," Whitmore continued. "Non-stop, in fact." "I fixed her chair," Ray said, still unsure if this was real. Whitmore smiled. "You did more than that, Mr. Turner. You gave her something we haven't been able to in a long time." They moved into the garage. The noise outside quieted once the rotors stopped spinning, but the air still buzzed with something electric. Marie was there too, her hair neater now, her posture more formal, but she gave Ray a warm smile that said, "Yes, this is all real." Ray sat slowly on his usual stool, while Whitmore stood across from him, hands clasped in front like a man used. "To boardrooms, not oil-stained concrete. I suppose I owe you an explanation," Whitmore said, "or at least some context." Ray nodded once, carefully. "We weren't passing through by accident," the man said. "Lila was supposed to spend the week with her caretaker, somewhere quiet, somewhere away from screens and hospitals. She chose this route, actually. Said she liked the name of your town, said it sounded like it could be a place where things worked." Ray almost smiled at that. "She didn't tell us about the broken chair until after." Whitmore continued. "Marie called it in, and by the time we sent someone to meet them, she was already telling the whole family about the man with the garage and the superhero hands." Lila chimed in from her new chair. "I told Daddy you fixed more than the wheels. I told him you fixed the part of me that still believed in people." Ray swallowed hard. He hadn't expected this. Any of it. "I'm no one special," he said quietly, "just someone who knew how to use a wrench." "That may be true," Whitmore said, "but Lila doesn't respond to many people, not without effort. You reached her. With kindness, with no expectation." Ray looked down at his stained boots. "It wasn't about reaching anyone. I saw a kid in trouble." Whitmore nodded slowly, thoughtfully. "We've been working on a program," he said. "A design initiative focused on mobility for children in rural areas. You'd be surprised how many families live with chairs that aren't fit for a sidewalk, let alone a dirt road. We have the technology, the funds, but we've lacked something." Ray looked up. "What's that?" "Heart," Whitmore said, simply. "We've had designs, engineers, corporate minds, but no one who understands what these machines mean on the ground. No one like you." Ray blinked. "Like me." "You've lived it," Whitmore said. "You've lost. You've loved. And you haven't stopped giving. That's rare. That's exactly who we need." Ray's voice was quiet. "You think I belong in a tech lab?" "No," Whitmore said. "I think you belong where the work matters. Whether that's here or with us, that's your call." There was a long pause. The hum of the generator, the whisper of a breeze through the doorway. Ray finally looked over at Lila. She gave him a small, knowing smile. "I still want to fly," she said, "but not to get away. Now I want to see what's out there." His throat tightened. "I had a son," Ray said suddenly. The words came without planning, as if they'd been waiting. "His name was Caleb. He used to talk about flying, too." Lila's gaze didn't change. "I know." Ray looked at her, surprised. "I didn't know his name," she said softly, "but I could feel it. When you were fixing my chair, it felt like you were fixing something you missed." No one spoke. Ray rubbed a hand over his face. It came away slightly damp. Not with oil. Whitmore stepped forward, placing a thick envelope on the workbench. "This is just a starter," he said. "Details, contracts, funding, but more than that, it's an invitation. You can say no, but something tells me you won't." He nodded once more, then turned toward the door. Lila followed, then paused. She rolled back toward Ray and took his hand in both of hers. "You said everything wants something," she whispered. "Well, I think some people just want to be needed." Ray looked at her, and for the first time in years, he allowed himself to hope, not cautiously, but fully. He watched the helicopter rise into the sky, shrinking into a silver dot before vanishing beyond the trees. The field fell silent again, but something inside Ray had shifted. The silence no longer felt empty. It felt open. Ray Turner didn't sleep that night. He tried. He lay on his back in the narrow cot behind the garage office, listening to the old wall clock tick its slow, steady rhythm. But every time he closed his eyes, he saw her, Lila, smiling from the doorway of a helicopter like it was the most normal thing in the world. Her words looped in his head. "I think some people just want to be needed." It was so simple, so impossibly true. He rose before dawn, like always, but instead of heading to the garage, he made himself a cup of coffee and sat at the small kitchen table in the back room. The envelope Charles Whitmore had left lay untouched in the center. Its crisp edges too clean for a place like this. Ray stared at it for a long time, like it might vanish if he blinked. Outside, the Wyoming morning was beginning to stretch its arms across the plains. A low mist clung to the tall grass. Somewhere in the distance, a rooster crowed. Another day, like all the rest. And yet, nothing felt the same. He picked up the envelope, opened it slowly. Inside, a detailed proposal, a personal letter from Whitmore, and a substantial check. Not a fortune, not yet, but enough to renovate his garage 3 times over, or pack up and move, or, if he wanted, walk away from it all. But it wasn't the money that made his hands tremble. It was the sentence in Whitmore's letter that caught his breath. "You understand what no one in our company can simulate, how it feels to watch someone you love lose freedom, and how vital it is to give it back." Ray sat back, the chair creaking under his weight. No one had ever said it so plainly, so precisely. He closed the envelope and stood. By mid-morning, he found himself driving, not to town, not to the hardware store. He was heading west along the quiet backroads that curved through golden fields and small farms and forgotten chapels. The radio was off, the windows down. About 20 miles out, he slowed at a gravel turnoff flanked by 2 white posts. The paint had peeled, the wooden gate hung slightly askew. He hadn't been here in nearly 2 years. The cemetery was quiet. Always was. A few faded flags fluttered by veteran headstones, and the breeze stirred the long weeds growing between the plots. He parked the truck, grabbed the small bouquet of wildflowers he'd picked from behind the garage, and walked the familiar path, Row E Stone 14. The marker was modest. No angels, no quotes. Just the name, Caleb James Turner, 997, 2010. Loved beyond words. Ray knelt, placing the flowers gently at the base of the stone. He sat there a long time, knees in the grass, eyes wet, not from the wind. "I met a girl yesterday," he said softly. "Her name's Lila." His voice felt foreign in the stillness. "She reminds me of you, not how you looked, more how you felt. You always had that way of seeing the world like it owed you magic." Ray smiled to himself. "She wants to fly, you know, not just talk about it. She means it, just like you did." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands clasped together. "She said something, Caleb. Something I can't shake. She said maybe some people just want to be needed." He paused, breath catching. "I think I stopped being needed when you left. Or maybe I convinced myself I did. Maybe it was easier to keep fixing broken things than admit I felt broken too." The wind picked up, brushing through the trees. "I don't know if I belong in some fancy program," he continued. "I don't know if I can help those people, those kids. But I think, maybe, I want to try." He placed a hand gently on the headstone. "I wish I could ask you what to do. But maybe. You just answered me." He stayed until the sun climbed. Then drove home in silence. Back at the garage, he pulled out the folder again and spread the documents across his workbench. Terms, proposals, plans, everything neat and professional. But he didn't start with the paperwork. He pulled out a clean notebook, the kind he hadn't used since the days he used to sketch car parts with Caleb. On the first page he wrote, "Ideas that don't exist yet." Below that, he scribbled fast, messy lines: modular wheels for gravel roads, magnetized locks for kids with weak hands, rain-resistant motors, must test in real storms. Each note was a flicker of something larger: purpose, memory, momentum. He wasn't a doctor. He wasn't a scientist, but he'd spent a lifetime fixing things people thought couldn't be fixed. Maybe that was enough. That evening, as the sun melted behind the hills, Ray stepped outside and leaned against the doorframe of the garage. The breeze carried the scent of sage and old dust. He looked out over the field, where the helicopter had landed, now quiet again, as if nothing extraordinary had ever touched it. But Ray knew better. Something had landed here, and it wasn't the helicopter. It was something else, something soft and deep and healing. Hope. Not the flashy kind. Not the kind you put on billboards, the kind that comes when a little girl in a broken wheelchair says, "You helped me believe again." And for the first time in many years, Ray Turner believed it too. The morning after visiting Caleb's grave, Ray Turner found himself staring at the contract again. He'd spread it across the workbench like an engine schematic, trying to make sense of all the fine print, as if decoding legal language might feel as natural as adjusting a carburetor. It didn't, not even close. The proposal wasn't a trick. Ray could tell that much. Everything was spelled out plainly: design consultation, small-scale prototyping, optional relocation, though that part was underlined with a note. "Only if you want. We'd be honored to work around your garage," Lila insisted. He smiled faintly at that. The kid had guts. Still, he hesitated. It wasn't the money. It wasn't the fear of failure, though that loomed large enough. It was this strange, bone-deep feeling that life was changing, really changing, and he wasn't used to life doing that without first taking something away. By noon, a black SUV, with tinted windows, pulled into the gravel driveway, tires crunching over stones, still damp from last night's dew. The same driver from the helicopter stepped out, nodded politely, and opened the rear door. Out came Charles Whitmore, dressed less like a CEO this time, khakis, a button-down, rolled sleeves. No tie, but still unmistakably a man who didn't just visit places like this, he acquired them. Ray wiped his hands on a towel and met him halfway. "Didn't expect to see you again so soon," Ray said. "I told Lila I'd try to be quick," Whitmore replied. "But she's a very persistent negotiator." Ray raised an eyebrow. "That means she's the one who sent you back here?" "She threatened to hijack the helicopter herself if I didn't," he said with a straight face. They both chuckled. Whitmore grew serious then. "I know this is a lot. You don't owe us anything, Mr. Turner, but if you're open to it, we'd like to show you what this could look like." They drove 2 towns over to a small municipal hangar where one of Whitmore's research teams had been temporarily stationed. Not a sleek corporate facility, just a large open space filled with drafting tables, computers, half-assembled components, and prototypes that looked more like science fiction than medical aid. Ray felt out of place at first. He moved slowly, hands behind his back, like someone visiting a museum where everything was too expensive to touch. "This is our rural mobility unit," Whitmore explained. "We've been trying to solve a problem no one seems interested in. What happens when a kid with disabilities doesn't live in a city? When the roads aren't paved, when the sidewalks are a myth, and power outages are just part of life?" Nodded, quietly absorbing it all. "We've had brains," Whitmore said. "We've had money. But Lila saw something we didn't. She saw you." Ray shook his head. "I'm not an engineer." "No," Whitmore agreed. "You're better." They walked past a workbench with several open sketches. Ray paused at one. A rugged, multi-terrain wheelchair with oversized all-weather tires and an adjustable suspension. There was a handwritten note in red ink at the corner of the page. "Make sure it can go through snow. I want to visit Grandpa's farm this winter." Leela Ray stared at it longer than he meant to. "She's got opinions," he murmured. Whitmore smiled. "That's the polite version." They moved toward a quieter corner of the hangar, where Lila was sitting in her new chair, chatting animatedly with 2 young designers. She spotted Ray instantly and wheeled toward him, faster than he thought possible. "Ray!" she beamed. "You came?" He knelt a little to be eye level. "You know, I'm starting to think you've been the boss this whole time." Lila leaned in and whispered, "I have. Daddy just signs the checks." Ray laughed, really laughed. She held up a small pad filled with drawings, some surprisingly detailed, others a child's imagination running wild. One showed a chair with helicopter blades, another had rocket boosters. "I told them I wanted something that flies," she said. "They said no." Ray flipped to a blank page and sketched a wheel with a tread design. "This is what you actually need," he said. "See those grooves? They grip better in mud and snow." Lila looked impressed. "You're hired." Later that afternoon, while Lila showed off the Mobility Lab's test track, Whitmore and Ray sat outside on folding chairs under the broad shade of an old hangar awning. "I have to ask," Ray said, watching the girl maneuver a slope with grace. "Why the chair she was in before? The old one? It wasn't built for her?" Whitmore's face changed, just slightly. The confident polish gave way to something more human. "She hated everything we gave her," he said. "Every top-tier device, every smart tech solution. Said they felt fake, clinical. She wanted something real. She wanted someone to care." Ray looked at him. Whitmore shrugged. "She found that in your garage. In you." Ray exhaled, the truth beginning to settle. She wasn't just a curious girl in a broken wheelchair. She was a girl who had everything except the feeling that someone saw her as more than a diagnosis, and she had found that in a run-down garage from a broken man who had once loved a broken boy, As the sun dipped low, painting the edge of the horizon in orange and rust, Whitmore turned. "Ray, one last time. You don't have to say yes today. But we're not just offering a job. We're asking for a partner. Lila's made that very clear." Ray watched the girl circle again, laughter trailing behind her like wind chimes. "I lost my son," he said quietly. "But I didn't lose. What he gave me." He turned to Whitmore, eyes steady. "Tell your daughter I'm in." Ray Turner didn't say much on the drive back. The SUV hummed quietly over the winding county roads, the late afternoon sun casting long golden shadows across the open fields. Charles Whitmore sat beside him in the back seat, respectfully silent. There was nothing more to say, not yet. Outside the window, Wyoming rolled past in slow, familiar frames, barbed wire fences, weathered barns, silhouettes of deer pausing just beyond the tree line. It was the same landscape Ray had driven through for 20 years, and yet it no longer looked like a place he was passing through. It looked like a place he might build something. When the SUV dropped him at the mouth of the gravel drive, Ray gave a small wave of thanks, then turned toward his garage, his world, now quiet in the golden light. A place of memory, a place of grief, a place that had just been asked to become something more. The old garage door groaned open like it always did. Dust motes floated in the last rays of sun slanting through the high window. The air smelled of steel, pine cleaner, and yesterday's coffee. Ray stepped inside like a man stepping back into a life he'd long been exiled from. He moved slowly past the workbench where Lila had sat, past the shelf where Caleb's old model airplane still gathered dust. He ran his fingers along the edge of the bench, then paused, eyes drifting to the framed photo on the wall. Caleb and Ray, side by side, the boy's cap too big, the smile too wide. Ray pulled up a stool and sat down hard, like he used to when Caleb was still alive, and they'd spend hours tinkering with toy engines and dream projects they never had time to finish. He let the quiet fill the room, the way it had every night for the last decade, but this time it didn't feel like loneliness. It felt like permission to begin again. He reached under the bench and pulled out an old metal box, the kind that once held wrenches and now held pieces of a father's unfinished grief. Inside were sketches. Some were Caleb's, drawn in crayon, others Ray's, done in pencil with neat labels, gear-assisted walker, modified handle for weak grip, push bar with shock dampeners, things they'd dreamed up in hospital rooms. Things Caleb never got to use. Ray spread the papers across the bench. So much loss, buried in so many lines. But today, it wasn't just loss he saw. It was starting points. That night, Ray didn't cook dinner. He didn't turn on the radio. He sat at the bench, drafting. He pulled out a fresh notebook, the one Charles had given him, though the pages were still blank. In the top left corner of page 1, Ray wrote in clean block letters, "Project. Real wheels for kids who don't live on sidewalks." He underlined it twice. Then he began sketching again. Not for Caleb this time, but for the next child. The one, 100 miles from the nearest specialist, the one whose parents were just trying to keep the wheelchair from sinking into their dirt driveway. He scribbled notes. Adjustable axle height for rocky ground. Grip-enhanced push rims for kids with low dexterity. Modular snow guards. Attachable, removable battery assist, but with backup manual override. His handwriting was a mess. His drawings weren't clean, but they were real. And they came. From a place no engineer in a corporate tower could reach, a place of lived understanding. Sometime around midnight, Ray stood, stretched his back, and wandered outside. The sky was clear, dusted with stars. The kind of stars city folks forgot existed. He walked out past the gravel, through the tall grass, toward the back of the lot, where the old bench stood, the one he and Caleb had built together the summer before the accident. It was still there, weather-worn but sturdy. Ray sat, and then, almost without realizing, he started to talk. "Hey, buddy," he said, voice low, scratchy. "It's been a while." The wind stirred. A breeze tugged gently at the tall weeds. "I got asked to help with something big. A girl. You'd like her. She's got your fire. She dreams like you used to, wants to fly." He smiled softly in the dark. "She made me believe again. Can you imagine that?" He paused. "I don't know if I'm enough, but I think I need to try, not just for her, for me, for you." His voice cracked. "I should have done this sooner." There was no answer, just the wind, the stars. But Ray felt something loosen in his chest. Not pain. Release. He woke the next morning, before the sun, as he always did, but this time he didn't start the day with routine. He pulled out the notebook again and wrote a new section, Prototype 1, Lila's Wheel, designed for voice, for stubbornness, for freedom. Then he circled it in thick red ink. Outside, the sky was pale with the promise of morning, and, for the first time in a long time, Ray Turner felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be, not fixing something broken, building something new. A week after Ray Turner said yes, the old garage began to sound different. The stillness that had once defined the space, the echo of solitude, the hum of a single man's routine, was replaced with something warmer, fuller. There was still the smell of oil and pine cleaner, but now it mingled with coffee from fresh thermoses, the scrape of new toolboxes on concrete, and the quiet murmur of collaboration. For the first time in years, Ray wasn't alone in his shop. Whitmore had kept his promise: no relocation, no disruption, just support brought right to Ray's door. The company had set up a mobile workspace in the adjacent shed, where two young engineers, Natalie and Jonas, worked side by side with Ray on sketches and builds. They were good kids, bright-eyed and respectful. Natalie had a gentle, precise way of asking questions. Jonas talked too fast, but listened better than most people Ray had met. More importantly, they didn't talk down to him. They understood something rare, that expertise didn't always wear a lab coat or carry a degree. Sometimes it came with grease under the fingernails and grief tucked deep behind the ribs. On Monday morning, they gathered around Ray's workbench, no longer cluttered but reorganized, humming with new life. Natalie unrolled a set of printed blueprints across the surface. "This is what the original prototype looked like," she said, pointing to a 3D model of an all-terrain wheelchair. "We focused on function first, durability, range, weather. Resistance," Jonas chimed in, tapping a different sheet. "But what we didn't think about is personality. The human feel. That's where we hit a wall." Ray studied the drawings in silence. Then he reached over, pulled out his notebook, and flipped to a sketch he'd drawn the night before. A simplified version of their design, with the center of gravity lowered and the push rims curved outward for smaller hands. He pushed it across the table. "This," he said, "feels like something a kid would want to use, not just something they have to." Jonas looked down, nodded slowly. "You lowered the seat, so they feel more grounded," Ray shrugged. "And safer," Natalie smiled. "That's exactly the kind of detail we miss behind our screens." As the week wore on, the garage transformed, not through construction, but through intention. What had once been a place for patching up broken vehicles now buzzed with the quiet urgency of purpose. Even the neighborhood started to notice. On Thursday afternoon, a pickup truck pulled into the lot. Ray recognized the driver immediately, Marlene, a widowed farmer who lived 5 miles down the road. Her grandson, Eli, sat in the passenger seat, his crutches folded neatly beside him. "I heard you're working on something," Marlene said with a smile. "Eli's got the kind of trouble no catalog wheelchair ever seems to fix." Ray knelt beside the boy. "What kind of ground do you walk on?" Eli grinned shyly. "Mostly mud, and sometimes goats." Ray laughed. "Well, we'll see what we Can do. They let Eli try a modified prototype Jonas had just adjusted. He wheeled himself across the gravel like he'd been doing it for years. For the first time in days, the sound of laughter filled the yard. Ray stood back and watched it all unfold. Young engineers measuring wheel depth, neighbors offering muffins and unsolicited advice, kids peeking in to ask questions. It felt like the garage had opened its doors, not just to work, but to community. That night Ray stayed late. The others had gone home, promising to return in the morning with fresh parts and new questions. He sat on his bench, alone again. But this time the silence was different. It was earned. The whiteboard leaned against. The back wall was covered in notes, material lists, torque calculations, weight limits. But in one corner, someone, probably Natalie, had scrawled in red marker, "Real wheels, built for real kids, inspired by one." Ray stared at the line for a while. He reached for his notebook and wrote beneath the day's sketches. Lila wasn't just a spark. She was a matchstick dropped into a box of old dreams I thought would never burn again. He closed the notebook gently. Then, for reasons he couldn't quite explain, he walked to the back of the garage, opened the old metal cabinet. No one else had touched, and pulled out Caleb's final design, a crude sketch, done in pencil. Dated 3 months before the boy passed. It was a chair, not unlike the ones they were building now, but with wings drawn on the sides. A child's dream, half fantasy, half engineering. At the bottom, in Caleb's blocky handwriting, "For someone who can't walk, but might still fly." Ray felt something well in his chest, not pain, pride. By the end of the week, the prototype had evolved, sleeker, tougher, but still simple. Still kind. Ray stood beside it, one hand on the push rim, the other resting on the backrest. "Feels like something Caleb would have drawn," he whispered. Natalie looked up from her laptop. "What did your son like to build?" Ray didn't hesitate. "Freedom," he said. Even when he couldn't walk, he wanted to feel like he could go. He never wanted the world to slow down for him. He just wanted something that let him keep up. Jonas nodded. "That's exactly what this does." Ray didn't reply. He just smiled. That evening, as the sun sank behind the hills, the garage sat glowing from within, light spilling out the windows, laughter echoing down the drive, the scent of metal and hope lingering in the air. Ray stepped outside, leaned on the doorway, and looked up at the sky. It was clear, and though he'd spent years thinking the best parts of his life had already happened, now, standing there surrounded by sketches and second chances, he allowed himself to believe, maybe, the best part was still being built. The convention hall in Denver was a far cry from Ray Turner's garage. It was all glass and steel and gleaming floors that made your footsteps sound important. Lights hung like halos from the rafters, and banners waved with bold, futuristic slogans. Innovation for all. Tomorrow starts today. Ray adjusted the sleeves of his borrowed blazer and exhaled slowly. He felt like a man wearing someone else's skin. It had been a long drive from his little Wyoming town to this center of progress and polish. The Whitmore team had arranged everything. Registration, a booth set up, even a hotel. They insisted he be here for the launch of the Real Wheels initiative, the program his hands had helped bring to life. But walking into that hall, surrounded by engineers in suits and polished pitch decks, Ray had never felt more out of place. Then he saw her. Lila. She was already there, rolling confidently through the crowd in the latest prototype they'd built together. Her chair moved like water, quiet, sure, effortless. She'd insisted on painting it purple, with silver streaks that shimmered under the lights. She called it her comet chair. When she spotted Ray, her whole face lit up. "Hey, partner," she called, wheeling over. "You clean up, okay?" Ray smiled. "You clean up like a comet." She laughed, a bright, unfiltered sound that cut through the noise of the hall. Their booth wasn't the biggest. It didn't have a video wall or a coffee bar like some others, but it had something better. It had story. One side of the booth displayed photos of their workspace back home, Ray's old garage, the gravel road, kids like Eli test-driving early versions. Another side held a glass display of the prototype itself, framed beneath a simple line, "For kids who don't live on sidewalks." Ray watched people pause, read. Some smiled. Some looked away thoughtfully. A few asked questions. Jonas and Natalie were busy giving demos and answering tech queries. But Ray stayed back, letting the others speak. He didn't need to explain. He'd already said everything with his hands. The event coordinator approached just after lunch, a clipboard tucked beneath her arm. "You'll be speaking at 2:15, she told Lila, who nodded like this was the most natural thing in the world. Ray blinked. "Speaking?" Lila grinned. "I told them I wanted to be the one to introduce it. You cool with that?" He chuckled, nervous. "Are you?" She leaned in close, lowering her voice. "I've faced bigger things than a microphone." He couldn't argue with that. At 2:10, they were led to a side stage overlooking the main floor. Chairs filled quickly. Technologists, donors, parents of children with disabilities, reporters with badges and cameras. Lila took center stage. Ray stood just behind her, hands in his pockets, shoulders slightly hunched. Then the lights dimmed. The room quieted, and Lila began. "My name is Lila Whitmore," she said, voice clear, strong. "I'm 9 years old. I was born with a condition that makes it hard for me to walk. But I wasn't born without dreams." A soft ripple of attention moved through the room. "I used to think that if I couldn't move the way other kids did, maybe my dreams didn't count, that I'd have to settle for watching the world from the sidelines." She paused. The silence leaned in. "Then one day, my wheelchair broke. On a gravel road, in the middle of nowhere, and I met a man with oil on his shirt and kindness in his hands." She turned slightly, gesturing toward Ray. "He didn't ask who I was. He didn't ask for money. He just said, 'Let's fix it.'" Ray looked down, throat tightening. "And that's what this project is about," Lila continued. "Not just building wheels, but building something for people who don't get asked what they dream about." The final slide behind her shifted to a picture of Ray's garage with the prototype in front and a quote in Lila's handwriting. "Because we all deserve to go farther than people expect." The room erupted in applause. Ray didn't move. At first, he just stood there, the sound washing over him like a tide he hadn't expected. Then Lila wheeled over and bumped his leg with her chair. "Come on," she whispered. "Take a bow, Mr. Superhero." He didn't bow, but he did raise a hand, half in thanks, half in disbelief, and that was enough. Later, after the crowd had moved on and the booth had quieted, a woman approached them with a boy beside her, maybe 8 years old, with braces on both legs and shy eyes. "I just wanted to say thank you," the woman said. He hasn't stopped smiling since you spoke." Ray knelt beside the boy. "What's your name?" "Isaiah." "You like to go fast, Isaiah?" The boy grinned and nodded. Ray looked up at Lila, then back at him. "We're working on something that just might help with that." The woman touched Ray's arm gently. "You don't know what this means." Ray did, actually, for the first time in years. He really did. That night, back at the hotel, Ray stood at the window of his room, watching the city lights blur into the dark. A notebook sat on the desk behind him, open to a fresh page. He would fill it soon, but not tonight. Tonight he just stood there, quietly proud, hearing Lila's words again, over and over. "I wasn't born without dreams. Neither was he. He had just forgotten them. Until now." The day after the exhibition, Ray Turner stood in the middle of his garage, as if seeing it for the first time. Nothing had changed, really. The same oil stains on the floor, the same uneven shelf where old spark plugs sat in dusty jars, the same wooden beams that creaked when the wind picked up from the north. But Ray had changed, and somehow, because of that, everything had. The whiteboard in the back was now filled with marker strokes in 4 different colors. Notes from Natalie, sketches. From Jonas, quick scribbles from Ray himself. The title at the top hadn't been erased in weeks. Real Wheels, Freedom that Fits Anywhere. Near it was a picture someone had taped up. Lila on stage in Denver, arms wide, beaming. In the background, Ray stood awkwardly with one hand raised, looking like a man who hadn't quite figured out how to accept applause. He smiled at the memory, not because of the recognition, but because he'd finally learned why he mattered. Not for fixing things, for building something that helped others move forward. Later that morning, the screen door creaked open and footsteps shuffled in. Small, eager ones. "Mr. Ray," a familiar voice called. He turned to see Eli, the neighbor boy, standing just inside the garage with a popsicle stick in one hand and a lopsided grin on his face. Behind him, his grandmother Marlene waved from the truck. "You said I could stop by and see the new one," Eli said. Ray crouched down to his level. "You came on the right day, partner. Want to take a look?" Eli nodded hard, his crutches squeaking slightly as he made his way to the workbench. Ray rolled out the latest prototype, a compact, lightweight model with curved armrests, off-road. Wheels and a seat made of breathable canvas. "It's not finished yet," Ray said. "But it's close. Thought we could use a real test pilot." Eli's eyes widened. "Me?" Ray winked. "You're the best we've got." They spent the next hour in the gravel lot behind the garage, Eli wheeling himself through dirt, over bumps, laughing as he turned tight corners and declared, "This thing drives better than Grandpa's tractor." Ray watched from the side, arms crossed, a quiet pride warming his chest. Not long ago, this lot had been empty, just weeds and gravel and the weight of memory. Now it was a runway. That afternoon, a few more neighborhood kids showed up. Then a curious father. Then someone from the local paper asking if Ray was the guy with the miracle wheels. By evening, the garage, once defined by silence, was buzzing with voices, conversations, plans, laughter, and Ray wasn't hiding behind the workbench. He was right in the middle of it. Later that night, after the last car pulled away and the lights were dimmed, Ray sat alone at his old wooden bench with a fresh cup of coffee. The garage was quiet again, but it wasn't empty. It was full of something invisible, something that didn't hang on walls or hum from machines. Belonging. He turned to the shelf beside him, pulled out the old metal box again, the one with Caleb's sketches. He hadn't opened it since the night he returned from the cemetery. Inside, beneath the worn designs and crumpled papers, was something he'd forgotten about entirely. A letter. Folded, yellowed, addressed in a child's careful handwriting. "For Dad, when I can't say it out loud." Ray hesitated, then unfolded it. The handwriting was crooked. A few letters were backward, but he read every word slowly, like a prayer. "Dear Dad, sometimes. I'm scared you're sad because of me. But I just want you to know I love being your kid. You don't have to fix everything. Just be with me when it's hard. That's what helps most. Also, I think our garage is magic." Love. Caleb Ray didn't cry, not fully, but his eyes stung and his throat closed around something soft and heavy. He whispered into the quiet, "You were right, buddy. It really was." He folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the box. Then he picked up his notebook and flipped to the next blank page. At the top he wrote, "Tomorrow. Test Eli's feedback on curb climbing, research fabric options. Lila mentioned overheating ask. Natalie, if we can build a kid-sized toolkit." Then at the bottom, in smaller letters, "Don't forget, you're still building something that matters." He tapped the pencil once against the page. Outside, the night wind rustled the tall grass in the fields beyond. The garage stood steady against the dark, its windows glowing faintly like lanterns in the dusk. Ray Turner leaned back, exhaled, and let himself feel something close to peace. For the first time in years, he didn't just fix things, he helped them move again. The first snow arrived quietly. Just a dusting, really. Soft flakes floating down onto the Wyoming plains, settling on fence posts, curling along the edges of the garage roof. It came without fanfare, without wind, just stillness and a hush that made even the gravel road seem reverent. Inside Turner's garage, a small celebration was underway, nothing grand. No speeches. Just coffee, hot cider, and a handful of folding chairs filled with neighbors, engineers, and children trying out the latest version of the all-terrain wheelchair now known, officially and proudly, as the Whitmore Comet. Ray Turner stood off to the side, his mug warm between his palms. His beard had grown a bit fuller. There were more creases around his eyes, though these days most of them came from smiling. Jonas and Natalie were huddled over a laptop nearby, streaming a live feed to Seattle, where the first production run of Real Wheels had officially launched 2 weeks ago. Already, the chairs were making their way to rural clinics, tribal communities, and border towns, places where smooth sidewalks were rare, but dreams still ran deep. Ray turned when he heard the chopper. It was a smaller one this time, quieter, sleeker. It landed gently in the field behind the garage, just like it had that first day, and out of it came Lila. She was taller now, just a little, her cheeks rounder, eyes sharper, that same spark still dancing behind them like light bouncing off chrome. She wheeled toward him faster than he expected, and for a moment he saw a blur of silver and purple and motion, pure, unstoppable motion. When she reached him, she stopped short and smiled up. "I brought a surprise." Ray raised an eyebrow. "I thought you were the surprise." She turned and waved toward the helicopter. Out stepped 4 kids, each one maneuvering down the ramp with ease, on their own wheels, different builds, different colors, different needs, but all of them moving, all of them free. One boy high-fived her on the way down. A girl with tight braids did a spin and laughed like the wind itself had been waiting for her. Ray stood still, hand pressed to his chest. Lila looked up at him. "They're the first." "The first?" "The first to get chairs from our shop. Straight from here, built off what we started. I wanted them to pick them up in person." Ray swallowed hard. "That's a lot of trust." She shrugged. "I knew you'd still be here." They spent the afternoon testing the chairs across the gravel and snow-dusted lot. Ray adjusted a bolt here, tightened a brake lever there, but mostly he just watched. Watched as these kids, once held back by terrain, by distance, by the lack of something designed for them, moved like they'd always belonged. The garage echoed with laughter, clanging tools, and the kind of joy that didn't need to explain itself. At one point, Natalie leaned over and said, "You know what this place feels like now?" Ray glanced up. "A launch pad," she smiled, "for more than wheels." As the sun began to set, turning the sky the color of copper and lavender, the crowd thinned. Parents packed cars, engineers exchanged notes, and the last few snowflakes drifted lazily from the clouds. Lila lingered behind, watching the garage glow in the fading light. "You ever think," she said softly, "that maybe some things break just so we can build them better?" Ray nodded. "Some things, some people too." She smiled. "Then we did okay." He reached into his back pocket and pulled out something small, a keychain, shaped like an airplane. The enamel was chipped, the metal worn smooth. "It belonged to my son," he said quietly. "I carried it long enough. Think it's time someone else did something with it." He handed it to her. Lila turned it over in her palm, reverently. "I'll fly with it," she whispered. Ray looked out over the snowy field. "I know you will." That night, after the lights dimmed and the kids had gone, Ray sat at his bench once more. The garage was quiet again, but not empty. He opened his notebook, flipping past pages filled with sketches, notes, and fingerprints. On the last blank page he wrote, "Final entry, first chapter." Today, a boy rolled through my garage on a chair we built and said, "I'm gonna race the wind." And for the first time in my life, I believed him. He put the pencil down. Then, on a whim, he walked to the far wall, an old plywood panel he hadn't touched in years. With a thick black marker, he scrawled something simple, something true. "We fix more than wheels here." He stood back and let the words settle. In the stillness that followed, he didn't feel the ache of what was lost, only the warmth of what had been found. And as snow fell softly on the roof above, Ray Turner, mechanic, father, builder of second chances, closed the door behind him and stepped into the quiet night, carrying with him a peace that had taken years to earn, a peace not of forgetting, but of finally knowing. He had helped the world move forward, one wheel at a time, and now I'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching from? What part of this story touched you the most? Leave a comment below. I read every single one, and your thoughts truly mean the world to me. If this story moved you, inspired you, or simply reminded you that kindness still matters, consider hitting subscribe and turning on notifications. We share stories like this every week, stories that uplift, heal, and remind us of the quiet beauty in ordinary lives. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time, take care and keep believing in the good.